I would say what we're trying to do, it's like anything else, right? You try not to do everything at once, break things down into fundamental chunks that we can consume and digest, and then start working from there and take partners. I think that's the biggest piece and challenge we've had so far. But you're exactly right. A lot of growth.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, Derek Imars, Executive Director of Pharmacy Supply Chain at Indiana University Health, joining us. He's going to talk all about transforming your pharmacy supply chain, and we're going to get into what that means with him today. But he's got a 5-year strategic roadmap that he's going to share with us on some pretty lofty goals and why supply chain automations, we need more of it in the pharmacy supply chain, but it needs to be done differently, Hayes.
Absolutely. But you're going to have to listen because we have a guy from IU that's going to talk about basketball, dribbling, passing, and shooting threes. So you better stay right here and listen to Derek.
All right, everybody, stay with us. We'll be right back with Derek Imars.
Bam! I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
Derek Imars, Executive Director of Pharmacy Supply Chain at Indiana University Health, joining us today. We haven't done a whole lot of these conversations around pharmacy. We've had a few, but we are going to dive into advancing practice, easing caregiver burden, and bending the medication cost curve. And I feel like, Derek, never a better time to be talking about pharmacy supply chain than right now while everybody's evaluating tariffs and the impact and disruption that's going on. So it's great to have you. And I also want to give a shout out that you just joined our Power Supply Advisory Group as well. Great group of folks kind of directing content creation and putting out those monthly articles from our LinkedIn page every month. So we're happy to have you and welcome to the podcast. And also thanks for being a listener.
Definitely. Thanks, Justin, Hayes, and Gary. Great to meet you in person and virtually, and enjoy what the content that you put out. There's not a lot of it in our space, and so appreciate what we have.
Why don't you just kind of give everybody your career path? You know, you were just kind of telling us as we were jumping in here that, you know, you kind of got hired into your current role in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. So that must have been interesting.
Yes. My background ties back to, first and foremost, I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. Purdue Boilermaker, so part of the Big Ten.
This was going so well,
my
Derek.
Partner Nate is shouting through the top. He's a Purdue guy.
That Music City Bowl against Tennessee, if you remember, he was down. He did not score, but that's a whole other issue. Go ahead.
That is, we have a long history of heartbreak. Attended Purdue University, the College of Pharmacy there. We have 3 in the state, and shortly after I graduated, I started with Ascension Health in Indiana, and I was in the staff pharmacist role. And over time, I took an interest and had a great set of mentors around me that really encouraged me to take an active look at leadership and developing myself. And so one of the areas that connected with me early on in my career was attempting to ease caregiver burden. I saw a lot of the extra work that I was doing, my coworkers were engaged with, our nursing staff partners, other providers, and I just thought there has to be a better way. This is really insanely difficult. And so got my business degree. That took me on a pathway to better understanding supply chain management and finances. And I started to really see the writing on the wall that the pharmacy exists as a specialized supply chain, but it's not. Sometimes I don't think it recognizes its true potential in this space. And so as a profession, I would say the last 20 to 25 years, similar to supply chain on their clinical integration journey, we've really tried to establish ourselves as providers first, and how can we bring clinical care to the bedside? How can we work with physicians to ensure outcomes? And that's great, but I think we are missing that other half of the puzzle where we're supply chain experts. We're the only supply chain individuals that I know of in existence that you have to have a license to touch the product that you actually move. And so that was critical for me. So after some time in Indiana, I transitioned over to the resource group. As Justin said, this was in 2020, just at the start of COVID, and I really learned a lot about how to address and solve broader scale issues in a hurry across 12 markets and 144 hospitals. And so we were standing up inventory trackers, doing real-time spot buys, trying to support and take care of patients. If you remember that really acute period of time, that was pretty critical. But I enjoyed my time with the resource group. My primary responsibility was deploying an inventory system that would help us perpetualize from a financial standpoint and from an inventory management standpoint. And on the tail end of my Ascension tenure, I actually had the chance to step into a role that supported automation support. And so I know some of your previous folks who have come on, they've discussed robotic process automation and other forms of utilizing bots to make life easier for clinicians and for our back office staff. And so I spent some time in that role, applying that to pharmacy, but also staging some of that work for Ascension, who was heading towards Oracle. And so really integrating automation into their ERP process with their internal automation team. But finally, after 12 years of tenure at Ascension, I took a role at Indiana University Health. They had an amazing opportunity to come support and manage their centralized service center, which we call the Integrated Service Center. That does fill up about 140,000 square feet. We're neighbors with our supply chain partners next door, and we do a lot of great work out of there, including centralized compounding. We've centralized procurement. Buck Sanford's the chief pharmacy officer. He's actually centralized the system team there, and we're starting to realize the benefits of that facility 2 years in. So happy to discuss more of that today for sure.
Derek, I think where I was going to go with this is obviously supply chain in the last, say 15, 20 years has evolved, but it's not revolutionary different, right? It's still the same thing. But meanwhile, pharmacy, in my mind, has changed radically because, it used to be 80-20, right? 80% of our patients were inpatient, 20% outpatient. That's completely flipped. Now we have specialty, we have retail, we have infusion, we have all these things. So can you just kind of give us an overview of IU Health and then maybe your role in that and just how it's evolved in the last 10, 15 years?
I think that's really insightful. So in my current role, we do look after end-to-end the entire pharmacy supply chain. And so part of what's been tasked to me and part of the vision for our work group is to take pharmacy leaders who have really gotten a better understanding, I would say, of the acute care environment. I break things out in classes of trade, right? So acute care environment and even our clinic environments. And we have now integrated multiple retail sites at the system level. We have also clinic settings that we manage to take care of. It's really a challenge to take folks who have ushered in and worked through the nuances of acute care operational process and then translate that over to the retail and specialty space. But that's something we're attempting to do. And as we continue to grow, that's got to be at the forefront of our attention. At this point, we have seen significant growth in specialty. Hayes, to your point, that was something when I onboarded, it was immediately obvious to me the impact that specialty makes in our space. And any way we can become more intelligent or start to carve out benefits and opportunities to partner in non-traditional ways, we had to start looking at that. And so I would say what we're trying to do, it's like anything else, right? Try not to do everything at once, break things down into fundamental chunks that we can consume and digest, and then start working from there and take partners. I think that's the biggest piece and challenge we've had so far. But you're exactly right. A lot of growth.
So, we've had a lot of, this is probably going to be our second episode in a row where we've talked about, kind of connecting people that are remote to the patient care with patient care. And one of the things you told me was this concept of purchase to patient that you really kind of honed in on in terms of pharmacy supply chain. Can you kind of describe what that means to you and tee up that part of the conversation?
Definitely. I think that's a great point, Justin. A lot of our staff that work at the system level, if they're 2 to 3 degrees of separation from a patient, they sometimes ask, what is my why? Where is my tie out to those folks? And a good example of the purchase to patient impact is tied back to the Baxter shortage that occurred last fall. For those unaware, there was a hurricane where Baxter's IV fluid facility was located in North Carolina. That drove massive impact for us. We're mostly a Baxter shop at this point. And so in October, in an effort to make sure our patients had what they need and that we were partnering with supply chain, we started to get creative in that procurement to patient process and said, what more can we do, especially with the centralized service center facility we had. So along that pathway, we were successful at acquiring the product that was needed to actually centralize and reconstitute some of those larger volume bags into a more usable form that was agreed on by the system. And so in doing so, we were able to stretch a lot of those really scarce resources and extend our touch to the patients. And this helped us ultimately avoid, on a large scale, we were looking, I think all hospitals were looking at potential cancellations, elective procedures were at risk. And I'm happy to say that maneuvering and that piece of the puzzle, at least in the pharmacy space, was one thing we were able to engage in. I think a second piece of that was our ability to collectively work with supply chain leaders to impact the patient, to help them understand, here are the alternative pathways. We can take some of these fluids, and here are the substitutes. And since supply chain managed the fluid, and we had some of that clinical knowledge, we were able to address and ensure that really vulnerable populations, like our pediatric patients who have cancer, individuals who need procedures for urology cases, they were taken care of because we were able to work across that aisle effectively. So I think that's what that means to me.
And Derek, you touched on it. You were kind of going down the lane. I'm just going to ask you to go a little bit deeper on it. But when you talk to like supply chain and sourcing and contracting and reaching out to GPOs or local enhanced agreements, you start talking about AWP, you start talking about 340B, you start throwing out all these different terms in pharmacy. You are the SHME, right? Tell me how that collaboration worked to engage those people to really understand there's all these bits and pieces. Like, you got to buy the right stuff to make sure we're taking care of our patients, because what, Hayes? It's all about mission. And Hayes is on mute. I gave him the tee up. He was on mute.
Mission.
That's all good. It's all
mission.
Good. Mission. So, Derek, just talk a little bit how you work that together with the group, because you are the SHME, man. You are, and we understand that. But just the lanes of how it came together, please.
Definitely. I think in general, if you look at pharmacy procurement, I think the first thing to call out is that we do work across multiple classes of trade, as I mentioned earlier. And within those classes of trade, we've got a lot of nuance with our pricing. In my history with working with Ascension and taking a look under the hood of Oracle, I was able to look across the aisle and see what supply chain had versus what we didn't have, but also what demands pharmacy had that couldn't be addressed by an ERP platform. And I think that's a really great way to kind of carve it out and say, what's the difference? And so getting folks to understand this is extremely complex. And so we found that the cleanest way to do some of this is to assign roles that are focused and very detailed to address these things. It takes a specialist knowledge to translate something into a simple form. It really does. And so a lot of this great work was occurring before I got to IU Health. But an example of this is our centralized purchasing team, right? So instead of having an individual at each site that has to know the nuances of each of our contract strategies, sourcing strategies, and translate those to value for the patient and for the site, we're able to centralize and utilize those folks more as inventory management specialists and requesters. And then centrally, similar to what supply chain has done, we've been successful at hiring centralized buyers and purchasers to take that to the next level. I know you had the former CEO from Spinman on a bit ago. We're actually looking to adopt one of these technology platforms to handle these challenges. He did note on his call, there's on this podcast alone, there's 15,000 price changes that occur throughout a year in a pharmacy health system. And so it's really important to us to address where's the data getting away from us. It's so big that we can't do it alone. But then B, we've kind of got the structure in place to say, once we understand how to utilize some of that data, we're creating purchasing controls around that to really help not only ensure service level, but value to our patients. So it's kind of going back to the basics. It's a lot of what we do is driven by 340B, but we do have some very specific contracts that we need to tie into, and that structure's helped us tremendously.
You told me that you feel like pharmacy supply chain deserves more automation. Is that part of the reason why? It's just like trying to manage really large, complex data sets?
I would agree with that. In the ERP space for supply chain side of things, they have automated tools that help with contract price reconciliation and match exceptions. That doesn't exist today for us. I think, in a future state where it would be more favorable, we would have vendor partners that could come forward and create those tools and actually build something that was custom and nuanced to pharmacy, and not just, I feel like a lot of what we get out of the box from the industry is just it's fit for supply chain, or it's fit for maybe inventory management. But we want to look at purchase cycle activity. We want to look at our operating cycle. We've got AP obligations. We have all of these other pieces that our peers in the supply chain space have, but we do not have universal accessibility into seeing, what's on the shelves at any point in time. What's our total financial picture? That really needs addressed by the industry, and I think the industry's taking a stab at it, but they're solving one piece of the puzzle per manufacturer at a time. It feels like there's no real holistic solution for this.
Derek, in an earlier conversation today with somebody, we were discussing the amount of systems that are available in our systems, databases, you name it, software. And this particular system has more than 50 that are related to pharmacy alone. And so they don't all talk to each other, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of challenges. I'm sure you're kind of shaking your head. You probably see some of that too with you guys.
We definitely do. If you just use a simple example to tie back to what Justin said between procurement and the patient, we have to scan medications into up to 10 disparate systems just to get to the patient. And if there's a break in any part of that cycle, we have a challenge. So I think this is a good point to call out. Hayes, in the supply chain space, master data is a frequently used term. Folks understand it. They understand that in order to execute and do business appropriately and accurately, we've got to have master data support. That word falls on deaf ears in pharmacy. If you asked a pharmacist who's your master data person, who's MDM, who's running this, they tell you, what, we have 7 to 10 systems. We update them the best we can with all the formulary detail, and we try to be accurate. And when there's an error, there's an error. But I think, holistically, if you look at pharmacy and you look at our biggest risk, it's the lack of awareness of a need for master data support in this space. Because, from a library pump to a 340B TPA system to an inventory system, you want that all to be accurate at baseline, or you're not going to be able to do what you want to do with what you have. So I think that's a great call out too. And it's a puzzle. We're seeing in this space right now, there's a lot of interoperability solutions that use EDI, and they connect and tie out. But holistically, they still feel a little bit clunky. And so I think we're going to be in a transition state for the next, I'd at least say 10 to 20 years, honestly.
Derek, you're talking about all this data moving forward. Can you speak to some of our listeners that maybe are fourth grader like me, how it ties into like our medication cabinet?
Quit bragging, Gary. You're not on the fourth grade level. Come on.
You know what? Kindergarten, drawn colors. Give me the crayons, Hayes. Let me roll. I'm trying to draw a picture here. I'm a visual learner here, okay? But Derek, I always think about, I've done a couple of those medication cabinets, been down that road, and how that flies right into the management, your inventory, your fiduciary responsibility. That's a whole nother piece, right?
Right. I tell our staff, I think, Gary, the medication cabinets are a great conversation piece. There's a few vendors out there. Most folks know Pyxis or Omnicell. Those are very common in the industry. But I think at the end of the day, if we look at the opportunity we have as a profession, this is an area of focus of mine. I like to tell our staff that our Pyxis machines should be and are our primary customer and conduit to our nursing provider partners. I look at the nursing profession over the last 4 or 5 years since COVID and say, they had a lot on their plates before. It's exacerbated since then. How can we make life easy? And what we found in some of the work I've done the last 10 years in pioneering some some of these processes that are sustainable, simple to follow through with, apply some automation. What I found is that if we can support and use data to make refill necessity less, stockouts less, we waste less, we have better throughput at the device. Transactions and volume, anytime you can pay attention to that, it supports those needs. So that's a definite space that I'm interested in, and we're excited to see and improve and provide better quality of life for our caregivers.
So you've got a 5-year strategic roadmap to try to tie all this together, right? And, figure out how you're going to make automations work. Because like you said, they don't really apply to pharmacy and they don't work really well. And I'm sure there's some concerns with that too. Like trying to leverage it probably creates, some issues within the healthcare supply chain. But I'd rather focus now on, what your initiatives look like, what that roadmap looks like, and how you wound up developing it.
Definitely. That's a great question, Justin. I want to start by giving kudos to my team. There's a whole host of talented people that work on our team, and I'm blessed to be able to work with them and solve these challenges. A lot of them have years of experience and tie out. And I would say when I joined IU Health about a year ago, once I onboarded, you have that first 3-month period, 6-month period where you don't want to move too many items and you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of where your challenges are. But with this team and with some of the knowledge I had obtained at Ascension, we put together a strategic roadmap, and it was originally about 27, 28 line items long of items and details that we knew collectively as a group, if we don't accomplish or make headway on each of these items in the next 5 years, we're going to really struggle to take care of our patients and maintain some kind of solvency from a financial standpoint. So we met in the fall, discussed those roadmap items. We integrated and took some of those forward. And part of that, Gary just alluded to, let's look at our ADC cabinets. That's the focal point of our supply chain demand. So if we correct that, we can start to correct our central pharmacy. Similar pieces, we're looking at expanding our purchasing optimization team, building the building blocks. And what I like to say, we're trying to dribble and pass the ball and shoot layups and free throws before we start chucking up threes and half-court shots, because that's where it needs to start. So this first year has been very fundamental driven. It's taken, I hear the team say a lot, hey, we've talked about doing this for years. Now we're actually doing it. And that's really gratifying, because I think, they're very smart people. They just needed some of that coordination and leadership to pull it together. And I'm excited to say that in July, we're meeting again, and we're going to take another look at the roadmap. So we're adding new items. We're giving updates on where we're at with our current items. And this tool, Justin, for us has become, it's something that I bring up a lot. I get teased at work, but it's become a way for us to really start to drive forward. What's our budget look like for the next year or two in terms of people and resources and capital? Which of these steps has to take place first before we can even consider the next step on the roadmap? And it's telling us what's important, prioritizing what's important, and giving us an opportunity. I don't think folks talk about this enough, to reduce. Sometimes you just got to take away. Like, is this our scope? Is this our purview? That list, as we move forward and it evolves, we might take a few items away from there. So it gives us a good solid foundation.
All right. So Derek, in support of that kind of 5-year strategic roadmap, what are, maybe like 3 key initiatives that are going to be integral to your success here?
Definitely. And Gary, you're doing God's work, Gary. That's what I say.
Thanks, Derek.
I would say if we were to tie out initiatives that we've started this year and carried forward into the future, the first one I like to bring up is management of shortages in the pharmacy space is just as disruptive as supply chain space. And so with the recent tariffs and the engagement with new executive orders, there's a lot of turbulence in the industry. And so what our organization has decided to do is, within this fiscal year, we are developing and creating a critical pharmaceutical list. And this is something I did in a past life. And this will be a listing of about, I would say, 135 to 150 SKUs that, quote unquote, keep the lights on, that we need to manage cases and ensure that patients have emergency meds. After that phase is done for 2026, there is a dependent next step in the roadmap that we're looking at that I think is pretty innovative and ties out some of the resource and facility we have that's unique to IU Health. and proactive secured allocations. And so once we've created that critical product list, we've created a sourcing strategy, which pathways do we want to go? We do plan on insourcing, I'd say upwards of a third to a half of that list, depending, and keeping 6 months of that individual SKU on site, issuing that to the facility, and then replenishing and making sure that we're, turning over that stock, but keeping appropriate counts. So in the event that a shortage happens, we're happening to the shortage versus the shortage happening to us. So that's one example. I'd say too, we discussed the ADC optimization. If you're going to align inventory and you're going to reduce waste, because there's a lot of waste in healthcare, you've got to start with that customer focus point. And so making sure that the demand that comes from our cabinets back to our central pharmacy, making sure that that's really consistent, allows us to not only reduce waste in our ADC Pyxis cabinets, but also the main pharmacy. And it helps us reduce any of the uncertainty in that demand wave that goes back to the integrated service center. So as we purchase and make volume-based commitments and perform direct contract agreements, we have more peace of mind that what we're seeing through that data, that it's accurate and that we're going to deliver on that value proposition with the manufacturer. A third piece I'd like to bring forward as well. I think at the end of the day, if we look at our next steps in evolution, it's really taking the voice of the customer and giving our site directors and our requesters a way to give us feedback as well, right? We have a pretty large operation where our centralized compounding team does a lot of great work, and they put out hundreds of thousands of doses a year. We do have a lot of purchasing that ties out and goes through our facility as well. And we want to make sure that, again, as I said earlier, we're taking partners with the pharmacy directors and those in the field, the clinics we service. We have a wide array of customers, and we're setting up shop to start to get their feedback and better understand, where do we need to improve? Where do we need to invest? Where's a blind spot we might have in delivering care for the patient that is just not obvious to us at the level we're at?
How are you leveraging that integrated service center that you were talking about before into this strategy?
That's a great question, Justin. I think, we're starting to better understand and go after. I have a great story. We met with Cost Plus Drugs a couple of months ago at this point, and we'd met with them once or twice, and they kept telling us, hey, Mark Cuban wants to meet. He's an Indiana University alum, went to Kelley School of Business. I thought, we won't see him. And on the most recent call, we showed up, and there he was in his office, IU hat on and full. He was getting ready to fly to Boston for a Celtics game, which was really cool. But we met with Mark, and just having that experience alone was great. But then after we stepped away from that, we started to say, how can we, do right by our partners in the distribution space, the GPO space, but also find a way to carve out certain pieces for us. And actually on this podcast, you had someone from Cardinal that said, hey, at the end of the day, Cardinal is not only tasked with selling a product to you, they're also tasked with managing volume commitments for these health systems they represent. And I thought a light bulb honestly went off, and I said, okay, we're leaving value on the table. And so in the ways that we can partner with the Cost Plus Drugs or a company that, may have just been knocking at the door of maybe a generic sourcing compliance agreement with one of the big three distributors and couldn't get it. Hey, how can we work together to ensure that we're driving down price and passing on that value to our patients? And so I think the ISC, the Integrated Service Center, is a great way to do that. It's our goal is not to maintain every SKU that is distributed across the system. We wouldn't be effective if we did that. But if we can surgically cut around the pieces that make the most sense and drive the most value, we can get the best of both worlds from our vendor partners, as well as the internal practice and intelligence that we're able to apply to the purchasing.
A lot of times when we're doing these podcasts, I'm thinking to myself, how do you get buy-in from senior leadership? We've talked a zillion times, I think, since the pandemic, especially about how much of a, seat at the table that supply chain is getting at the with the C-suite now and really having some influence on it. But now it's more like, okay, you may have that audience where you didn't before, but how are you still making an impact when you're presenting the information, right? And how are you getting that senior level buy-in, from the organization and even other pharmacy leaders or colleagues that, are throughout a larger health system, because sometimes you want to have a real unified, system-wide, coordinated, kind of effort that way. So how are you kind of taking this strategy and these key initiatives and kind of tying it into something that is, succinct enough and really connects maybe purchase to patient as a theme to get the C-level to really, get on board with the initiative and put some support behind it?
Definitely. Another great question. I think first and foremost, one of the things that I really appreciate about Indiana University Health was pharmacy is known as a service line that delivers. And I think that reputation carries and gets your foot in the door. You may not get a yes to every question you ask, or if you need a certain piece of capital, it may not be able to do it this year, maybe 2 years from now, but you've at least got a chance because of your previous track record with deliverables. I would say the second thing is taking relationships. Buck Stanford, our chief pharmacy officer, does a masterful job of that. I think he's well integrated, and he knows the key relationships he needs to leverage while we're going through this process. But I think ultimately it comes down to what you said, Justin. It's tying out the business plan to how is this impacting our patient. And so one interesting thing that IU Health does that we just went through our initial capital review process is they not only want to know, what's the IRR for a project? What do you get in return for this? But how does it impact patients in an intangible way? What are the qualitative results? And how are you tracking those? And so as we submit for a capital project, we have to tell that story. But I would say from a more organic level, it comes from the trust that our finance team has in us. We've delivered on items when we've asked for them. But we're also, as we move forward, another piece of this, Justin, is just not getting complacent with what we're taking care of acute care, we're taking care of this, that, and the other. We're really starting to broaden our approach and dabble in areas that we know these executive leaders have had communication in. So we're looking at you mentioned infusion earlier. Home infusion is a massive market, and it continues to grow. And there's site of care changes, right? We've got managed care payers that will reimburse it at a home location, but will not reimburse at a hospital HOPD. And so when our leaders are educated and informed, and we've got to provide the groundwork for a lot of that sometimes too, they're then able to pick up the value of the why and understand if we don't make this decision and do this today, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to have tangible negative outcomes.
Yeah, it's all about tying it back to the mission, Gary.
All day long. I love hearing it. You said it clearly. I love the qualitative approach with capital. Loved it too. Another piece of the puzzle.
And I have seen many systems are actually making a lot of money in pharmacy. So if you do feed it with more capital, some really good things can happen to the bottom line. So that's been encouraging.
I already have episode 2 planned.
Yeah.
Ooh, episode 2. All right.
Hayes, to add to that, this is one thing that's been unique to my career and a few others, but pharmacy's always been seen as a cost center, right? We're constantly just, what can you do to reduce costs, labor? We are now seen as a revenue builder, growth builder. I was at a conference last week, and one of the speakers said, "Hey, pharmacy, if it wasn't for pharmacy, we'd be struggling financially." And I thought, wow, that's impactful. And this individual followed that up with saying that oftentimes pharmacy, it's like this with retail, right? If you took Walmart pharmacy and you took their pharmacy out of the company, they would still be a Fortune 500 company. I think that's the take home. If you took hospital, healthcare-based pharmacy out, we're still a massive business in and to ourselves, but we're not a hospital. So we're not treated like one all the time. So that getting back to the why, getting back to the mission, getting back to the critical pieces, that's the game. That's what we need to play to take care of our patients.
All right, guys, get this guy a cup of coffee, because coffee's for closers. He just wrapped that episode beautifully. Derek, nice job. Thanks for coming on the show.
How long have you been sitting on that line? You heard someone else put that line somewhere.
It's in a movie, Hayes. I know you're too young for the 80s movies, but
put that coffee pot down. Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers. You see this watch? It's for closers.
Great.
That was so
Derek.
bad.
Thanks
Derek,
for coming
by the way,
great job. That was Derek Imars, Executive Director, Pharmacy Supply Chain at Indiana University Health, IU Health, everybody, and talking a lot about some of their 5-year strategy there, easing caregiver burden, advancing practice, and bending the medication cost curve. I mean, I feel like we just touched the surface of this conversation, Gary, honestly. There's a lot going on there, and it's great to have somebody from pharmacy come on and talk about the differences between, pharmacy supply chain and the supply chain topics that we discuss, most of the time on this show.
Yeah, Derek is a wealth of knowledge. His concept of purchase to patient really kind of was a call out that I thought was just amazingly shared. His connection to supply chain, I mean, truly, pharmacy supply chain, he called it. He's doing inventory controls. He's thinking about this shortages that are coming. He's balancing everything in this 5-year plan. And then in the middle of it, the voice of the customer he brought up, like, what are we missing? What are we bringing back to the table that we can strategize moving this forward? And the last thing I'll share is just I loved his version on the capital requests, including not just the quantitative, but the qualitative piece too to support mission. So definitely amazing interview, and just a pleasure to have him on today.
All right. Great job, Derek. And thank you all out there for listening. On behalf of Hayes and Gary and I, that's been another episode in the books here on Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.